One of the biggest misunderstandings about HR is that fair means everyone gets the exact same outcome. That sounds right. It sounds clean. It's simple. But that is not how the workplace actually works. Fair does not always mean equal. Fair means the standard is consistent, the facts are reviewed, and the decision is based on the right things. And that difference matters because a lot of workplace frustration comes from people seeing two situations from the outside and assuming they're identical. They did the same thing I did. They got treated differently. That person got an exception. And sometimes they are right, and sometimes it is favoritism. Sometimes it is inconsistency. Sometimes a manager is protecting someone they like, and sometimes leadership is avoiding a hard decision. But sometimes the situations are not actually the same, and that is where HR has to live, not in the rumor or the emotional reaction or the surface level comparison. HR has to look at the standard, the facts, the documentation, the context, the risk, and the reason behind the decision. That is the part of fairness most people don't see. Equal treatment is not always fair treatment. Here's the first point. Equal treatment sounds fair, but it is not always fair. If two employees are in completely different circumstances, treating them exactly the same can actually create a worse situation. That is hard for people to accept because we like simple comparisons. Same rule, same punishment, same situation, same outcome. But workplaces are not that clean. Two employees can violate the same policy and it still not be the same situation. One employee may have a long history of the same issue. The other employee might have no prior discipline. One employee may be honest when asked what happened, and the other may lie during the investigation. One clearly creates a serious operational risk. Those facts matter, and HR's role is to slow the decision down enough to ask the right questions. Not because HR wants to overcomplicate everything, but because fairness requires more than matching outcomes. It requires understanding the facts. This is where HR should bring discipline to the process. What policy applies? What actually happened? Are the employees truly similarly situated? What is documented? How has the company handled this before? Is the recommendation based on facts, or is the manager reacting emotionally? That's the HR lens. Employees usually just see the outcome. HR has to evaluate the process. Here's where the workplace gossip usually starts. People hear the short version. She was late and got written up. He was late and nothing happened. And from the outside, that sounds unfair. Maybe it is. But maybe there is more to the story. Maybe one person has been late 12 times and the other just had their first documented issue. Maybe one person called ahead and the other was a no-call, no-show. Maybe one situation involved a protected leave. Maybe one manager documented everything and the other manager never did. It's a common issue. A company can know something happened, but if the manager didn't document it, did not address it, did not follow the process, and did not create a record, HR may not be able to treat it the same way later. That frustrates people, but it is real. Because in HR, everybody knows is not documentation. It has been happening forever, is not documentation. I talked to them before. It's not documentation if there has no been a record of what was said, when it was said, or what the expectation that was set was. And this is where HR helps protect fairness. HR should be asking managers for specifics, not feelings or labels, or they had a bad attitude, what happened, when did it happen, who witnessed it, what policy or expectation was violated. Was the employee told the expectation before? Was there prior coaching, prior discipline? It's not red tape. That is how you make sure decisions are based on facts instead of frustration. And honestly, that protects everyone. It protects the company from inconsistent decisions. It protects employees from managers who want to freestyle their discipline. And it protects good managers who are actually trying to hold people accountable the right way. An exception is not automatically favoritism. This is one of the biggest things employees don't see and they misunderstand. An exception is not automatically favoritism. Sometimes an exception is the legally correct answer. Sometimes it is the fair answer. Sometimes treating someone differently is exactly what the situation requires. Think about accommodations. If an employee has a disability and needs a reasonable accommodation, that may mean their schedules, duties, equipment, or work process looks a little different from someone else's. And from the outside, another employee might see that and say, why do they get special treatment? But from the HR seat, that may not be special treatment. That may just be compliance. That may be an individualized process the employer is legally required to engage in. And this does not only apply to disability accommodations. There may be protected leave issues. Religious accommodations are a thing. Pregnancy-related limitations, medical restrictions, confidential information that the rest of the workplace does not and should not know about. This is where HR has a difficult job. HR has to protect confidentiality while also helping managers apply the standard correctly. That means HR may not be able to explain every detail to everyone who is upset, and that is frustrating for both parties. But privacy matters. The workplace is not entitled to someone's medical information just because people are curious why something was handled differently. So, when an employee says that is not fair, they got an exception. The real HR question is, was it handled consistently with law and policy? Was it documented properly? Was it limited to what the situation required? That is the difference between a legitimate exception and favoritism. Favoritism is, I like the person, so the rules do not apply. Fairness is, the standard still matters, but the facts require a different approach. Those are not the same thing. Different treatment becomes a problem when the reason is wrong. Here's the part HR has to be very clear about. Different treatment is not automatically illegal. Different treatment for the wrong reason is where the problem starts. If two employees are treated differently because the facts are different, that may be appropriate. If they are treated differently because one person has a disability, filed a complaint, took protected leave, raised a safety concern, is pregnant, belongs to a protected class, or simply not liked by the manager, well, now we have a more serious issue. The question is not only were they treated differently, the question is why were they treated differently? That is where HR has to pressure test the decision. Can the manager explain it? Does the explanation make sense? Is it tied to a policy? Supported by documentation? How have we handled the situation before? Would we make the same decision if this were a different employee? The last question is pretty important because a lot of inconsistency hides behind vague language. They are not a good fit. They have bad attitude. They're not a team player. Well, maybe, but HR should not stop there. What does that mean? What behavior are we talking about? Was the expectation clear? Was it even addressed? Was the employee given a chance to correct it? Are we applying that same standard to other people? In HR, the explanation matters. If the explanation is weak, the decision is weak. And if the explanation changes every time someone asks a follow-up question, that is a huge red flag. Consistency is not sameness, and this is where I see people get stuck. They think consistency means identical outcomes. It does not. Consistency means the organization uses the same decision-making framework, same standards, process, seriousness, same willingness to review the facts, same expectation that managers can explain their decisions. That does not always lead to the exact same outcome, but it should lead to a defensible outcome. And that is what good HR is trying to create and maintain. Not perfect decisions, not decisions everyone likes, that's for sure. Defensible decisions, decisions that can survive daylight. That's why documentation matters. That's why policies matter. That is why HR asks annoying follow-up questions, because the workplace, well, it can't run on vibes. It cannot run on who complained the loudest or which manager is the most frustrated. It has to run on standards. And when those standards are not clear, people fill in the gaps with suspicion. That is when the trust starts to break down. Employees do not need to know every confidential detail, but they do need to believe the process is real. They have to trust HR is setting a standard and expecting those standards to be maintained. If people believe outcomes depend on favoritism, relationships, or who complains the most, the workplace has lost credibility. And once the credibility is gone, every decision becomes harder. Fairness affects trust. That is why fairness is not just an HR topic. It's a workplace topic. When employees believe decisions are fair, they are more likely to trust the organization. When they believe decisions are inconsistent or hidden or political, they start protecting themselves. They stop giving the benefit of the doubt. They assume the worst. They disengage. They stop bringing issues forward because they do not believe anything will be handled correctly. I've seen this countless times. Fairness matters so much. It affects the trust, and trust affects how people show up at work. This is where HR can help leadership understand the bigger picture here. An unfair decision does not just impact the employee involved, it sends a message to everyone watching. They watch who gets coached, who gets written up, who gets promoted and who gets protected, who gets exceptions. They watch whether the policy means something or whether it only applies when it's convenient. That does not mean every employee interpretation is accurate. It means leadership needs to understand that decisions create signals. Good HR helps leadership think about those signals before the damage is done. HR's job is not to make everyone happy. Here's the frustrating part that needs to be said. It's impossible. Sometimes the fair decision will still upset people. Sometimes the right decision will be unpopular. Sometimes an employee will only know part of the story and likely assume HR got it wrong, but that just comes with the territory. HR's job is not to chase approval. HR's job is to help organize, make decisions that are consistent, lawful, documented, and tied to legitimate business reasons. That means HR has to tell employees no sometimes. They have to tell managers no sometimes. And honestly, the second part is where good HR really matters, because weak HR only pushes back on employees. Good HR also pushes back on leadership. If a manager wants to terminate someone with no documentation, HR should step in and should question it. If a supervisor wants to punish one employee but ignore the same behavior from another, HR should question it. If the company is about to create a consistency problem, HR should say so before it becomes a bigger issue. It's not HR being difficult, it's just HR doing the job. Fairness is not about giving everyone what they want. Fairness is about making sure the process is clean, the reasons legitimate, and the decision can be explained. For employees, here's what I would say. You are allowed to question fairness. You should. You are allowed to notice inconsistency. You are allowed to raise questions when something does not feel right. But understand, you may not have all the facts. You may not know someone's prior discipline, medical issues, or a request for accommodation. You may not know what's already been documented. So instead of assuming every different outcome is unfair, focused on the part that you can actually raise. Can you help me understand the standard? Can you explain what the expectation is going forward? I'm concerned this policy is not being applied consistently. Those are all great ways to approach it. And if you truly believe there's favoritism or discrimination or retaliation, raise it clearly. not as gossip, but as a concern, because HR can do a lot more with specifics than we can with rumors. For managers, this is something I would pay attention to. If you want HR to support your decision, you need to be able to explain your decision. You need facts, documentation, consistency. You need to show that employees understood the expectation. You need to show that the decision is based on behavior, performance, policy, or business need, not frustration or personality. Not I'm tired of dealing with them, because once HR starts asking questions, the weakness of the decision usually shows up pretty quickly. And if the only answer is, well, everybody knows, that's certainly not enough. Managers create a lot of HR problems by waiting too long, documenting too little, and then wanting a strong outcome at the end. That's backwards. If the issue matters, address it early. If you address it, document it. If you document it, be factual. And if you want a different outcome than another employee received, be ready to explain the facts as to why they are different. That is how you protect fairness. So in closing, fair does not always mean equal. Fair means the standard is consistent. The facts matter, the process matters, the reason matters, the documentation matters, and sometimes the fair outcome is not the identical outcome. That is the part of HR most people will never see. People see the result. HR has to evaluate the decision. Was it consistent, documented, lawful, based on the right facts? Was it tied to a legitimate business reason? Was it handled the same way you would handle a situation with someone else? That's fairness, not sameness, because equal treatment sounds good, but fair treatment requires sound judgment. Well, that's the insight for today. If you found this useful, stick around. And if you need practical HR support for your workplace, I'll have my website linked below. I'll see you in the next one.